Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful, Mr. Speaker, to the tone and the cooperative context in which the Honourable Lady has made her remark, and quite rightly she has a number of questions which I will attempt to answer. But let me just begin by saying, fundamentally, we are in agreement that Iran and the regime in Iran can never have a nuclear weapon, and all of our efforts are designed to ensure that that is the case. And the whole House will understand that this is not just about Iran, the region and global security. It is because we have to remain steadfast in our commitment to not see nuclear proliferation. And if Iran got a nuclear weapon, clearly there would be others in the region that would seek to follow. And so it's a sober commitment that really begins 80 years ago that we must see to completion in relation of their ambitions. She asks about the British nationals in Israel. There are just over 4,000 British nationals that have registered their interests following our appeal last week. And we would estimate that somewhere between 15 to 25% of them indicate, this is following the pattern in previous crises in Israel and in the region, take up the offer of British assistance to leave. As she knows, the airspace has been closed, and so that offer up until this point was about getting them to the border. But I'm very pleased that that flight has landed and taken off. We hope to work with the Israeli government on further flights in the area. My understanding is that there has been a military plane that the Americans have put on for their citizens from Israel, but she will understand the uniqueness of the relationship that the United States has with America that facilitated that opening up, and I'm very pleased that we have been able to garner that same agreement today with the Israeli government. This is an ongoing and fast-moving situation. She has heard what I have advised British nationals in Qatar today, and of course we keep this under close review, and there may need to be further updates over the course of the next few days. It was important that I was in Washington, D.C., sitting with the US administration, and in that meeting with Marco Rubio and Steve Witkoff last week, it was very clear to me that all options were on the table, and President Trump had those options in front of us. I, of course, discussed with them in detail the trip that I would be making alongside my French, German, and the European High Representative in Geneva, and they were keen and hopeful that that might be successful. It was not successful, but we continue to press the Iranians to take the off-ramp and get into those negotiations with the United States and with the E3 to ensure that they are in compliance. She asks about the legal advice. That must rightly be a matter for the US government in relation to their action. And I'm pleased that she mentioned the ministerial code. She will know that Section 213 of the ministerial code prevents those of us in government, and she has been in government in the past, discussing legal advice so that government can operate in the appropriate way. But I would say to her, this was not our action. We have been clear that we were not involved. She asked also whether we had any request from the US government. We did not get such a request, but we were notified before the action took place. She asked also about state threats, and it is right to say that we have thwarted 20 such state threats since 2022 in this country, and she will know, including the highest tier that we put Iran on for national interference, that we take the threats from Iran very seriously, and we are reviewing and will come forward with legislation in the coming months in relation to the gaps that Sir John Hall found in how we deal with state threats in our country.
The Select Committee. Dame Emily Thornbury.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The only way to stop Iran from building a nuclear bomb is a deal. There cannot be a deal without negotiations, and there cannot be negotiations without trust. And given that President Trump tore up the first nuclear deal and is now acting alongside Israel, whose attack last week ended the US-Iran negotiations for a new nuclear deal, and given that the war aims of this campaign are so unclear, an emboldened Netanyahu government is calling for a regime change, and President Trump is hinting at it too. It can be difficult to see how in all those circumstances there can be negotiations based on trust. Yes. Does the Foreign Secretary agree that Britain must continue to play a role in these negotiations, even though they must seem an incredibly difficult and challenging prospect?
Yeah. Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to my right honourable friend, the Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, for her question. And it goes to the heart of where the UK should be at this time. And that is at the centre of the diplomatic effort. A diplomatic effort that will be necessary at the end of this process. Because sadly, once you have the ability to enrich uranium to 60%, that knowledge is not lost. It is the stepping stone to an advanced weapon, and therefore only a diplomatic solution and the correct framework can ensure that we keep the global community safe.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Callum Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I also thank the Foreign Secretary for the advanced sight of his statement. On these benches, Mr. Speaker, we share in the condemnation of an Iranian regime that poses an existential threat to Israel and has terrorised its own people as surely as citizens from other countries around the world, including the UK. That is why we support the consensus in this House that Iran can never be allowed to have nuclear weapons. Yet it is not clear that military action by Israel and the US can provide the long-term lock on Iran's nuclear ambitions which we need. Following this weekend's strike, it is reported that Iran will work at pace to develop weapons with what remains of their enriched uranium supplies. This should give pause to those on the Conservative and Reform benches who have breathlessly echoed President Trump's line that these strikes have been an unrivalled success. For instead of bringing security, Trump and Netanyahu's unilateral actions have increased uncertainty and the risk of a full-scale regional war. Their belief that might is right both further erodes the rule-based international order and undermines the prospects of containing Iran and other rogue states in the long term. This is not in the UK's interest. That is why Liberal Democrats have called consistently for the application of robust diplomacy, supported by IAEA monitoring and grounded in international law, as the only sustainable way permanently to limit Iran's nuclear ambitions. Our immediate priority must now be to ensure the safety and support of British nationals in the region, learning the lessons of unacceptable delays on previous occasions. So I ask the Foreign Secretary, why has it taken over a week since the start of strikes to begin repatriating Britons from Israel? And what more is being done to support those in the wider region who want to leave? The government has also remained silent on the legality of this conflict, Mr. Speaker. Will the Foreign Secretary now commit to publishing the Attorney-General's advice on whether any UK involvement in this conflict would constitute a breach of international law? And will he confirm that this House will be given a vote before any decision for the UK to enter this conflict?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I agree with the honourable gentleman and the thrust of his remarks, which are around diplomacy and the need for diplomacy at this time. And he's absolutely right about the malign intent of the IRGC and the Iranian regime, whose desire is to wipe Israel off the map. And we must stand up to that pernicious ideology. Our attempts are to gain de-escalation, and I would remind him that Just yesterday, Vice President Vance has said that delaying the development of a nuclear weapon was the goal. We're at war with Iran's nuclear program. We're not at war with the Iranian people. And it's important to keep that in his mind's eye. He asks about British nationals. He's heard what I said about the airspace being closed. I'm pleased that that first flight has taken off. And I would remind him also that successive UN resolutions, Resolution 2231 particularly, I would refer him to, in relation to this long-standing breach. He asks about the legal advice. He's heard my comments on the legal advice. We were not involved. This is not our legal context. And he asks about publishing the AGs. That might have been appropriate if we were involved, but I don't think it is. But we're not involved, and so there's no such advice to publish.
Dan Corden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I welcome the Foreign Secretary's calls to move this to a negotiated solution and his focus on UK defence and security. He's right, Iran must never acquire a nuclear weapon. However, history also teaches us on the issue of regime change that interventions aimed at regime change in Iraq, in Libya, in Afghanistan have produced prolonged instability, not just in the region but far wider. So what concrete lessons does he believe can be learned from this recent history in shaping Iran policy today?
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman, but he'll forgive me. I'm not going to enter into a history lesson from the dispatch box, except to remind him that on Sunday I achieved 25 years as an elected parliamentarian, and during the course of that period, of course, there has been debates about regime change. But I also remind him that the US has been clear that their attention is to target the nuclear threat, and we should keep that in mind.
Sir James Cleverly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the Right Honourable Gentleman, the Foreign Secretary, concede now that the international community's unwillingness to take robust action through things like snapback and the JCPOA mechanisms is part of the reason why Israel felt the need to take the initial strikes and for America to do likewise? I agree that ultimately diplomatic means will be the only long-term resolution to this, but that's not just about asking nicely for Iran to put its nuclear weapons away. It is about enforcing them and making sure they do through mechanisms. So will he ensure that if we're not going to be involved in military action, I understand the reason why we might not want to do that, we will ensure robust action is taken underpinned by things that will force Iran to do the right thing rather than just hoping that they will do the right thing.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman, and I know that he knows how difficult it is dealing with Iran. He will remember that under JCPOA, they were allowed to enrich to 3.67%. 3.67. And today, they're at 60%. And the question is, how could that possibly be for civilian use? And I challenged the foreign minister from Iran about this on Friday. We've had 7 rounds of negotiations with the Iranians, and those rounds begun under his government, and he would have been Foreign Secretary for a period when those begun, and they have obfuscated, they have deceived, and the time now is to get real.
Uma Kumran.
Speaker, can the Foreign Secretary assure this House that the escalating conflict in Iran, where we all want to see urgent de-escalation, will not take focus from the UK's efforts to end the devastating war in Gaza, to help the Palestinian people, to free the hostages and lift restrictions on humanitarian and medical aid?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. The loss of life over the last few days, hundreds of people who've lost their lives queuing for food is appalling and should offend us all. And of course, when I spoke to Israel's foreign minister yesterday, I reminded him once again about my deep concerns about the new system that Israel has put in place to deliver aid, and our belief that that system will not work, and we need to return to a much better provision.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Foreign Secretary has said that Iran must not be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. So does he therefore support the recent targeted strikes by the United States and Israel on Iranian nuclear facilities, yes or no? And if not, can he explain how exactly that inaction would have curtailed Iran's nuclear ambitions?
Foreign Secretary.
I'm afraid I'm not able to give an assessment at this stage of the effectiveness of that action, and neither is the United States. And the Honourable Lady may think that that is a binary question. I don't believe it is a binary question. What the UK is engaged in is diplomacy, and working, of course, with our closest ally, the United States.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I associate myself with this condemnation of the humanitarian crisis in Gaza, but ask that we need condemnation to be matched with accountability? Here in the UK, Jewish communities in particular are deeply concerned at the moment about what lies ahead. Last week at the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, the Iranian ambassador acknowledged that MI5 had identified 23 threats on British soil organised by the Iranian regime. What's his message to Jewish communities who are on a state of high alert at the moment, wondering what will happen?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for his question. He's right that the Iranian regime is the world's worst sponsor of state terrorism and state threats. We have individuals, 3 that have been arrested under our National Security Act, currently moving through our judicial system. And I would want to reassure those in the Jewish community in our country that we take those threats very seriously. And I, working alongside the Home Secretary, will do all we can to keep them, their buildings, their institutions, their families safe.
Sir Julian Lewis.
As usual, I agree with much of what the Foreign Secretary has to say, but I do have to ask him, how many times must a terrorist-funding, fanatical regime threaten to wipe another country from the face of the earth before a government advised by Lord Hermer of Chagos acknowledges that military action to delay and degrade its nuclear weapons program is both ethically and legally justifiable?
Foreign Secretary.
I simply say to the right honourable gentleman, and I say this with all respect, there is a convention in our country about the very important role that Attorney Generals play in our government, able to give government advice when asked for. It happens under all governments, and I don't really recognise the caricature that I've heard or some of the reports. And I want to make it crystal clear, we were not involved in this action, and therefore, really, some of what's being said is wholly beyond the pale.
Abdesam Mohammed.
Mr. Speaker, many of my constituents have contacted me over the weekend, fearful of the fallout of US intervention in Iran. They know, and we know, that wars do not make the world a safer place, but much more dangerous. Their concerns are not unwarranted. In 2002, Netanyahu offered a guarantee that regime change in Iraq would bring enormous positive reverberations to the region. But we now know that there was no imminent threat, and there were no evidence of weapons. The scale of the disaster, not just in Iraq but across the region, was so profound that the Chilcot inquiry insisted any future military intervention must be met with rigorous scrutiny. Does the Foreign Secretary accept this scrutiny, and will he again provide reassurance to the House that we will not enter an endless war fuelled by provocative, reckless provocateurs?
Foreign Secretary.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and just to say to her, I was in the House during that period in which Chilcot was making his work, and of course I'd want to reassure her that our government, and I hope all future governments here in the UK, have learnt from its findings.
Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Foreign Secretary has confirmed that Britain was not involved in the strikes on Iran. Will he also confirm whether or not the US administration sought permission to use Diego Garcia as the launch point for these strikes? If it was sought and was denied, on what basis did the Prime Minister deny permission? And if it wasn't sought, what does it say about the UK-US relationship that America would rather fly around the world from Missouri than launch from Diego Garcia?
Foreign Secretary.
They did not seek that advice.
Elise Ballinger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the Foreign Secretary for his measured approach to this crisis. In past rounds of violence, Iran has often lent on its proxies to conduct retaliation. That includes the Houthis of Yemen, who up until recently have been attacking UK and international shipping in the Red Sea. Can I ask the Foreign Secretary what steps he is taking to protect UK shipping in that area and to keep those trade routes that are so vital for our country safe?
Foreign Secretary.
We have seen that Iran's proxies have been considerably degraded over this period. Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis held back, but still active in the Red Sea. And we will do all we can, working with partners, to protect our shipping routes. And we have been crystal clear to the Iranian regime about the Strait of Hormuz, particularly.
Sir John Whittingdale.
When the Foreign Affairs Committee met the Iranian ambassador twice last week, he claimed that the Iranian nuclear program was legal and purely civil, and he said that they wanted to negotiate. Can the Foreign Secretary say, on the basis of his numerous meetings that he has reported with the Iranian Foreign Minister, whether he gained any impression of Iran's willingness either to dismantle their nuclear program or to negotiate?
Foreign Secretary.
I'm very grateful for the Right Honourable Gentleman's question. It's the central question. And what I have found is inflexibility and a failure to face the seriousness with which the international community are looking at this question, to accept that we've moved on from the JCPOA, which they pulled out of back in 2019, that the focus now is on zero enrichment. Maybe they can have a civil nuclear capability, but it would have to be heavily monitored and would have to have some sort of international regime, I suspect, to be in locus with it. They have to face that seriousness now at this point.
Florence Session-Lowe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Foreign Secretary for his statement this afternoon. And the Foreign Secretary said that I know the whole House will have in their thoughts the many civilians impacted by this fighting. I have in my thoughts the many protesters who took to the streets after the brutal and tragic killing of Mahsa Amini in 2002, September 2002. We saw those protesters coming forward, standing up against the brutal regime, and we saw people be mutilated. And the last 20 years of intervention has shown that war and wider escalation will not help these people. It will not help the ordinary Iranians who are suffering under this regime. I've received many emails from my constituents, Mr. Speaker. My constituents said the priority should be to negotiate a peaceful resolution to the conflicts and not supplying weapons to either side of the conflict. Further, to support the facilitation of aid to civilians impacted by this war. Can the Foreign Secretary assure me that the UK will not act immediately to follow in on any military action, and we will urge the US and Israel to de-escalate and to avoid targeting innocent civilians?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for mentioning Maha Amini, a young woman imprisoned in Iran because of her appearance, killed in police custody, 20,000 people, many of them who protested, thrown in jail as a result, and 500 who effectively were murdered and lost their lives. That's the regime that we're talking about, and she's quite right to remind the House about that this afternoon. And I would refer her to the statements I previously made about our position on diplomacy.
Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For a lot of people watching and worrying over the weekend, they'll have seen many of the hallmarks of Iraq. Yet, despite that, the Foreign Secretary can't tell us whether he believes these strikes were the right thing to do or not. The Foreign Secretary can't tell us whether he believes that these strikes were legal or not. And the Foreign Secretary has failed today to outline whether this House would be given a vote on any potential military action in this conflict. Is he purposely treating the public as fools?
Foreign Secretary.
I've got to say to the honourable gentleman, he may just have got a soundbite, but I'm really on the nuclear question. I'm not going to take lecturing from the honourable gentleman. I'm afraid he's got a very sorry record in relation to that very serious matter. We have been very clear that diplomacy is the way, that de-escalation is our position. That's what you pursue if you're serious about foreign policy, and I'd recommend our approach to the honourable gentleman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I first join the Foreign Secretary in thanking our brave service personnel from RAF Prize Norton for repatriating British citizens back from Tel Aviv. On this Armed Forces Week, I think we are all grateful for their courage and sacrifice. Yeah. On Iran, let's be clear about the regime. It has killed thousands upon thousands, upheld brutal suppression of democracy, rights of women and LGBT+ people. It has demonstrated a consistent intent to sponsor terrorism and act through proxies and with violence in order to destabilise the region. But all military action must go through the process of international law, and it must be executed based on a plan and intent to return to democracy. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that we must do what we can to support de-escalation as soon as possible?
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for his service in the RAF, and I'm sure he's thinking about former colleagues at RAF Akrotiri and across our 2 sovereign bases in this area, and about our bilateral defence partnership with so many countries in the region particularly. And I'm very pleased to make it crystal clear that the path through this is a diplomatic one, is for Iran to return back to negotiation and to recognise the power of the global community being absolutely clear. They cannot have a nuclear weapon.
Bob Black.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's good news that the Home Secretary has finally decided, reportedly, to prescribe the treacherous terrorist group Palestinian Action. Now, given that she's done that at great speed after the attack recently, and the IRGC have conducted attacks or attempted attacks on this country multiple times, will he now use his powers to persuade the Home Secretary to prescribe the IRGC in its entirety?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman, and the prescription question is always an issue for the Home Secretary. In the decision that she's made today, it's important to stress that it's a process involving all the relevant agencies and their assessment in the activities. But I have to say the attack on RAF bases is disgraceful and totally unacceptable, and the force of the law must bear down on it. She keeps prescription under review. I know it's a long-standing issue that this honourable gentleman has raised.
Jessica Moore.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Foreign Secretary for this statement and acknowledge, like many constituents have this week, the intense diplomatic efforts of his teams in ever-changing and ever-challenging times. But I know they will also want to be reassured, given the absolutely intolerable situation in Gaza, that we will not let up on pressing in absolutely every way we can for more aid to get through and for an immediate ceasefire. And I know the Foreign Secretary said this last week and this week today at the statement, but please could he underline that again?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend, and this morning I sat in my office with Eli Sharabi, who managed to get out of a Hamas cell but lost many family members during that journey. And he talked about the starvation that he experienced, going down to 44 kilograms after being 70 when he went in. It was humbling to hear his story and to be reminded that the humanitarian catastrophe affected everyone in Gaza. But he did say that the Hamas who were holding him ate plentiful while they watched him and others with him starve.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that there's a consensus across, I think, the whole House that Iran should not have a nuclear weapon, it seems to me there's a sort of a lack of willingness to recognise when negotiations after many years have patently failed to yield results. So will the Foreign Secretary join Reform and myself in thanking the United States and Israel for degrading the Iranian nuclear weapons programme?
Well, I had two conversations with Secretary of State Rubio yesterday, and I hope he would say that we've established a very good working relationship over that period, and he will know that I have a long-standing or longer-standing relationship with Vice President Vance. And to be clear, the United States position is that we are at war with Iran's nuclear program. This was a targeted attack, and it's important to understand their efforts to degrade, but we have not yet had that assessment as to its effectiveness.
Richard Burke.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Iraq showed the grave dangers of following a right-wing US president into an illegal war for a regime change. The consequences were hundreds of thousands of dead, mass destruction, mass devastation, regional chaos and wasted resources. Many fear that the same thing is happening now. So will the Foreign Secretary confirm that any such war on Iran for regime change would be illegal under international law? And will the Foreign Secretary confirm that he would oppose in UK involvement in any such intervention, in any such war?
Foreign Secretary. Confident in my engagement with the United States and the discussions that I've had, including those in the White House last week, that this is not about regime change. And I should remind the honourable gentleman that the Israelis too have been clear that they are not attacking the civilian leadership in Iran.
Sir Bernard Jenkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It does appear that the House agrees with the government's objective that Iran should never have nuclear weapons, but the government is prepared to will the ends, but not the means. And it begs the question about who is really running the government. Why did Lord Homer's opinion on the legality of military action or UK involvement become public last week? Was it leaked? Was it briefed? And doesn't it demonstrate that the government is paralysed and divided over this question instead of leading from the front?
Foreign Secretary.
No.
Laura Kirk-Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I commend the Foreign Secretary for urging calm and restraint at this troubling time. I know he's been engaging with European counterparts, notably France and Germany as the E3. But as the positions of the US and Israel and Iran harden, does the Foreign Secretary agree with me that this is a moment where our relationship with Europe as a collective force for diplomacy and peace is going to be crucial?
Foreign Secretary.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. It was important for the so-called E3, the United Kingdom, alongside Germany and France, working with the EU's High Representative to make clear our concerns about Iran's nuclear ambitions to the Iranian forum and urge him to come back to diplomacy. And then all of us were on the phone to him again after the action. Of course, there's an important role for Europe, particularly as the custodians of the JCPOA, and because we have a decision to make about whether we will in fact snap back and impose a heavy set of sanctions on Iran if they fail